Now, what we did this weekend, as people walked up and laid their stories in, face down, I turned it over, and I'm going to start with the very first one and read through. When 3 of these signs go up to say stop, Kathy's going to give me the high sign, and we will stop, and if 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of them have comments they would like to make about a particular reading, and then we'll go on. Does everybody understand? Any questions? Concerns?
Echo?
Yes?
I don't know if you've looked, do those pages have the genre on them?
None of them do.
They don't? Okay, darn.
Well, maybe 1 or 2, but no.
If they do, tell them what the genre is. It helps.
Yes, please.
They were, that was supposed to happen this year, but
The
they
genre
didn't
didn't
quite
happen, so, okay.
take.
I'll read the title and or as a date. Yeah. Here we go, gang. You ready? Okay. This one is titled An Ice Ferry Adventure. A blustering blizzard blew out of the north, swirling snow through village streets. It whistled and whined, dropping 2 round bundles in the topmost branches of a fir tree, and whirled on its way. Snowy branches sparkled in the sun. 1 bundle quivered. A furry ear popped up. Then another. Shaking snow away, a pair of downy wings unfolded. A tiny figure fluttered upright and gazed around. An ice fairy. Ooh, where are we this time? And what is that? She brushed snowflakes off her eyelashes, then poked the other bundle. Dandy, look! In a flurry of flakes, a second fairy appeared. What are you so excited about, Dilly? He saw where she pointed. Oh, that's a house. People live there. I saw one once with Dad. He said to stay away. Dilly fluttered her wings and lifted in the air. I want to see. No, Dilly. You know where to stay put. Mom and Dad will find us. You'll get in trouble again. Just a quick peek. Dilly flew to a window and peered in, then to another. A door opened, and she darted in.
I don't think any of this stopped it because it was quite enjoyable just to listen to. Maybe I can speak for the other panelists. Some fun alliteration, definitely. The flitting fairy, or I can't remember exactly. So children's YA, that would keep me going. It's not something I read myself to sleep at night, but hey, it works.
I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too, and being seriously picky, just say be careful how many adjectives you string together in the beginning.
I heard Susan, and I was captured when the ears started to unfurl one at a time.
This is the second one. It's dated May 28, 1957. Dr. Eugene Travers hovered over the tray of donuts. He marveled at the fact that every day there was a new batch of fresh pastries from which to choose. He knew the nearest town was 100 miles away from this top-secret facility, deep in the Nevada desert. Buried 250 under the surface, the facility was so secret that the staff of 122 people were shuttled in on CH-37 Mojave helicopters from Nellis Air Force Base. A commute he despised, almost as much as being away from his family for 14 days at a time. He selected a jelly filled and tried to place it in a napkin without too much of its sugary goodness sticking to his fingers. He would have to eat it on the way to the lab, since he was running late already. Travers scurried down the long corridor, his footsteps echoing off bare concrete walls. He glanced down at the nuclear wing with a secret satisfaction that for the first time since the war, chemists were now the spear point of the project's research. As he approached the Army private at the laboratory door, who stood at attention before he turned and opened it, "Good morning, Dr. Travers," the private greeted. "Is Dr. Smith irritated?" Travers asked. "He has already left, sir." Oh, Travers' eyebrows raised. About a half hour ago. Okay, thank you. Dr. Travers hurried into the lab and tossed the wadded napkin into the trash can at his desk, then turned to face the large glass window that separated the office from Project XLSC 150. Oh God, he said, as the color drained from his face. He rushed to the glass and peered beyond its barrier. Oh God, no! He dashed to a metal box mounted on the wall and lifted its cover. He stared at the large red button and thought about the lives of the 122 people that worked here. Then he thought about his wife and children. He pushed the button.
That was good. Sci-fi, art fiction, anybody? Or are we going full in on this one?
People didn't put it on, so we
Yeah,
don't
it's
know.
supposed to be anonymous, yeah.
Yeah, that was actually pretty engaging. The only pinch editing point is dispose of the phrase "the fact that." Get rid of it, and you won't notice it's gone. Trust me on that one. But that sounded like a fun intro to some tech sci-fi, something or other. Sounds like probably it's analysis of aliens or something going along the way.
Really enjoyed it. I liked the mention of the donut. I think that was a fun way to kind of engage the reader. I will say near the end of the excerpt, I got a little lost with some of the description and had a hard time figuring out what the conflict was near the end. So I would say maybe even bring in the conflict a little bit early on. I mean, just listening. I think if I were looking at the page, that would help a little bit more as well. But I would say maybe clarify a little bit near the end.
I love the donut. It's such a human touch to engage the reader, especially when you're going to put us 250 feet underground in clearly a nuclear test facility kind of situation where none of us have been, probably. I think that I would bring the conflict up a little sooner, and I also think I would maybe leave some of the jargon out because it's easy to get lost in that. You could put it in later, explain it, but definitely an interesting beginning.
I'm going to have to agree with got a little lost on the jargon and the conflict, but I enjoyed it, and it made me want to figure out what it was.
This next one is titled Grace. The photographer had snapped the picture as the bucket of crimson paint was thrown on me as I stepped from the courthouse. Perfect timing, I thought. The look of anguish evident on my face. The rich and powerful have spoken. The front page of the Houston Chronicle was proof positive of the power of the press and their ability to skew the truth. Disgraced ER doctor accused of homicide. What it failed to report was that I was found not guilty. Not guilty only meant that the medical review board could find nothing wrong with my treatment of the patient. The community would not be so forgiving. I was ruined. The news didn't improve when I gathered the mail. 2 letters and the eviction notice that I expected. Not that the loss of the rundown apartment that I called home was worth lamenting. Not for the first time I contemplated my actions that fateful night that changed my life. My mother would have made the same decision as I. Okay, we'll stop there.
I'll start with this one. There's a lot of info dumping happening right here. So I really don't connect with the protagonist here, even though there's a lot of good information. When starting a book, it's so important to create emotional connection with the reader and the protagonist. And so with this, I would say really focus on developing the scene a little bit more, show versus tell, and focus on developing the protagonist, how they're really feeling when they get paint dumped on them, and then bring in the information of their situation.
I'm going to agree with that, and I'm going to simplify it and just say that first sentence is fascinating, and then it got lost in the welter of information. And I'm sorry, but if I had paint dumped on me, I would be feeling some stuff there, and I would want to go into that for just a minute. I mean, I had a hard time retaining that had happened because then other things got dumped on me so quickly. So I want to know, wow, is that a shock? Can we still breathe on it? Where is the paint? Are Are you feeling suffocated? What's going on in that moment? And then you can start building the story after that. But first, give us that connection with the person. Have you ever gotten paint dumped on you? That has got to be seriously, really horribly uncomfortable. And in the context it's in, there had to be a lot of emotions swirling over that person.
I agree with that. I mean, it was hard to tell then that the paint incident was something in the past, but that still gives you the opportunity, even if you're just seeing it in paper, to relive the experience and even draw it forward. You feel the lingering effects of that as you're home, and it's just like another dome of paint, or things that really could make that vivid. That first sentence got me, and then, like the rest of you, I just got lost in the information.
This one is titled, or it's not titled, it says page 2 of 246. It's titled Chapter 1. There's a scripture. It's, "In the house of my Father are many mansions, and if not, I would have told you. I go on to prepare a place for you," from John 14:2. I'm a shadow person. A shadow person. A shadow person. No one notices the shadow. No one notices me. Irena chanted this phrase under her breath as she lurched behind her mother. Eyes glued to the tassels on her mother's shawl, she looked neither left nor right as they made their way to Ashbridge's main gate. She wished they didn't have to live so far from the gate, but they lived in a cottage on the main street of town. Their shop was halfway to the castle, and that meant walking down the busiest street in town. If we only lived in the country, I wouldn't have to go through this. Every day she was forced to make her way through crowds of people who gawked at her. She could feel the blush creeping up her neck as they neared a cluster of children. Children who would point, gawk, giggle, and imitate her lurching gait. Just once, she wished they wouldn't notice her. The sharp-eyed little urchins never missed an opportunity to taunt. Every time she and her mother went foraging, and that was nearly every day, except when it rained, she got that gut-wrenching, sickly feeling that made her want to stay home and hide. Irena tried to hide her shambling gait by keeping her mother between herself and the gawkers, but it never really worked. You'd think after all these years they would be used to her by now. When she was little, it was easier to hide, but now that she was nearly about a woman, she couldn't avoid their stares. Oh, some people tried not to stare, pretend they didn't notice, but she knew. In her heart, she knew exactly what they were thinking. In her heart, it was as if the town crier was shouting through the streets, "There goes the cripple! There goes the cripple!" She heaved a sigh of relief at the sight of the towering gate with the raised portcullis. In her eagerness to escape the gawkers, she almost passed her mother.
I like the opening in it, and the creativity and description is really good. Now, one thing I would like to have is a little dialogue earlier, because it sounds like a medieval or some sort of fantasy story, but unless it's going for the classic, Sir Walter Scott, we're going to go 20% into the story before someone speaks. You need to just get some dialogue besides the taunting from some characters so we can begin the development connection process.
Just more dialogue sooner, but simply too much repetition, I think, of the issue. Yes, she is different and is being taunted, but I want something to happen to break up the sort of barrage of you're different, this is horrible. And not that I say that without sympathy, but I think as readers at some point we're like, enough, okay, I get the point, and let's have something happen and move on.
I was willing to give it a little more than these past two commenters because I really liked the verbs. I liked that I really felt the feelings up front, but I agree with what they said, and I wouldn't have given it much further had something not happened sooner.
This next piece is titled Enlightenment, and it's a young author science fiction. Hawk watched her dull reflection on the dingy metal walls and was grateful it was her only companion tonight. She heard the soft padding of her feet against the floor, but otherwise the hallway was silent. She rushed onward, her eyes darting toward every surface, looking for any sign of movement in the empty corridor. Now was no time for prying eyes, and lately it seemed everybody knew her every move. She reached the end of the hallway and placed a pale hand upon the door. As the door slid to the side, Hawk thrust her arm up to block the rays of a blinding blue light. She took small, hesitant steps forward, her eyes downcast toward the floor. Soon she was staring down into a grated metal. A glow shined through the grate, allowing Hawk to see clearly the emptiness below. The door made a soft swoosh as it closed behind her. Hawk narrowed her eyes and extended a hand while taking one final step forward. Her hand had a metal railing, which she gripped with both hands as she slowly lifted her head. Finally, her eyes adjusted and she could see the beauty before her. A blue orb glared behind thick glass. The surface seemed to roll upon itself in varying shades of blue and black. The bubbling blue hues meant Hawk never got the same view twice, no matter how often she came to look at it. Ironically, its nature of constant change felt like the most stable part of her life. Perhaps that's why she kept coming back.
It's compelling, but it's quiet. It's a very quiet beginning. I would assume that's the opening of the book, or does it say on there? Yeah, that sounds like something maybe in the middle of the book, but it's very quiet, it's stealthy. We're going to make something more perhaps dramatic happen. But that's me. I prefer dramatic thriller fiction. That's just a bias, but I want not that the building's going to blow up, but something more instigating to get you going.
I want to add on to that because I do kind of like the quiet opening. I think some dialogue on the first page would help, but since it's science fiction, when creating trying to world build a science fiction fantasy, it's really important to establish setting and rules of the world up front. So in a way, I kind of appreciated the easing into the fact that I'm on a spaceship, I'm looking out at a planet, and so I would recommend putting on some dialogue on the first page, or maybe introducing another character even, or having some kind of exchange, maybe even in this quiet setting, just to establish some stakes, or even maybe having stakes with the character. Maybe the character's super afraid to be discovered, or something to keep the reader going. But I think in this sense, I really did like being eased into the fact that I'm on a spaceship, I know that there's a planet, I know that this character finds solace when looking at this orb.
I would say I would actually like a little backstory, just a tiny bit, just a glimpse of what is propelling this character to view this orb. It would make me feel like reading on if I had some bit more information, whether it was dialogue or whatever. But
I just didn't want to add because it would be repetitious. So
I love how we all had different feedback though, which is really great. That means that it hit different.
So I'll add one thing.
I got a little over-adjectived. A little too many blues, a little too many, the hand reaching, etc. Began to feel repetitive to me.
Okay, there's nothing on the top of this piece. Ben had pondered killing anyone for quite some time, at least not seriously. He knew he could. He'd done it before. Tool pusher who liked little girls. Shot off his mouth once too often, and sons of bitches found himself out in the prairie, gutted from asshole to appetite. Man wasn't quite dead yet when the coyotes came sniffing. Best think of something else. Arms tucked behind his head, Ben groaned as he shifted in the sunlight, rainbows flickering behind his eyelids, old bones grateful for the heat. He wasn't sleepy, but the fish weren't biting, so when Jess suggested a nap, He couldn't find an argument, and he crawled up in the truck bed. So here he lay, listening to his best friend snore, a grunting counterpoint to the water lapping at the riverbank. It was sure a beautiful day, blue sky and plenty of sun. A light breeze riffled through the tall grass, setting the cottonwoods to gossiping. It was a rare treat to be out in the fresh air, and Ben meant to savor it. That last round of chemo really knocked his dick in the dirt. Day after day spent listless on the couch, worn out and afraid to eat, not wanting to shit himself or puke his guts out, knowing if he did eat, everything would taste like boiled hot dogs, the cheap kind. No way for a man to live. And the chemo wasn't killing the cancer, just beating it back some. Doc said the treatment might give him another year. Stop and he might have 2-3 months tops.
It was super voicey. I was really enjoying the voice and the original language and the variety, and we dove, the chemo's important, it's a conflict, but we dove into that and then we started to stay there with nothing else happening, which is looking back, and I wanted something that moved forward.
About the same thing. It sounds like a cowboy/western sort of opening. Just need one more thing to happen. Like, oh, hey, I'm shoot guy, and it's dead, and then we're slowing down a bit. Instead, hit the gas. Go, do it.
This one has no indication at the top of it, anything, so. Jake looked up from his phone when he heard the anger in his dad's voice. Jake finished texting and hit send as he walked through Michael Running-Deer's home office. Usually his dad only raised his voice when they were working cows, and that didn't count because everybody's dad raised their voice when they were out working cows. Jake poked his head in the door. Michael stood behind the fake wooden desk that they'd bought at a garage sale. He tapped an open calendar with a pencil. "I'm sorry, Mr. Markham," Michael said. "As I've already explained, the week of August 15 through 22 is fully booked." Jake heard a man's voice on the other end of the phone. It sounded loud and demanding. Michael lowered his tall frame into the chair and furiously shook the mouse to wake up the computer. The veins on his neck stuck out. "I appreciate that you are looking at our website," he said. "We do have excellent reviews. Yes, I understand. No, paying double won't change my mind. Not even triple. No." Michael made a note on the calendar. "Triple," Jake said. "Triple?" Jake knew that the triple was a lot of money and would go a long ways toward helping the family's outfitting business get off the ground. They'd been taking summer fishing and photo trips into the backcountry for a couple of years to supplement the income from the ranch. The first year, most of the clients had been from the Denver area, but this summer, there had been some from other big cities. The Running-Deers hadn't made much profit yet. Jake had overheard the whispered conversations between his mom and dad. The price of cows was down. The price of everything else was up.
I keep reading.
I would keep reading. I think I would, I think it gets a little tangled in the voices on the phone and what Jake is hearing, and so there may be a little clarification in there, but I would definitely keep reading.
That could be the reader's fault too. Okay. This is the next piece, and there's nothing to indicate anything on it. Every morning, with astonished regularity, Curly Marchbanks sneezes. I take this as a sure sign of spring, along with the return of the demented robin and the high pollen count. Curly Marchbanks stands on his porch, stretches, bends over to retrieve his morning paper, and sneezes. My eyes pop open. I look at the clock, 7:10 a.m., and I smile. I have been awakened by the Marchbanks sneeze for 16 summers. Not only does Curly Marchbanks serve as my alarm clock, he is also head of the neighborhood watch committee. Mrs. Marchbanks died several years ago, and Curly is lonely. He spends a great deal of time chatting with neighbors and puttering in his yard, which is crammed full of old rusty pickup trucks in various stages of disrepair. Curly talks in a fast, high-pitched, squeaky Alabama voice. He has very few teeth, and none of us are quite sure what is happening with his remaining hair, although it does appear that his name may have been derived from the state of his hair when he was younger. No one knows how old he is either, not even Curly. He has told us all this story quite a number of times, how he has no birth certificate and nobody in the family is alive to recall what year he was born. Most of us are thinking about 75, but we could be wrong. It is very difficult to extract oneself from a conversation with Curly. It usually begins with a direct approach, such as showing up at someone's front door with something to report. Did you know you left your car window down last night? Someone is going to steal that car if you keep doing that. By the way, are you going to get those dead tree limbs trimmed? They're a menace. And so forth.
I think the writing of this is really good. I love the voice. I love YA for that reason, and I don't think this is YA, but I love just the voice. And I love the description of this Curly. I think it's super fun. When starting a book, this is not, I wouldn't say that this is the opening of a chapter, because it's not your protagonist. So you have another narrator who's waking up, who has heard this sneeze. And so even though it's a great description of this character, and I feel really connected to this Curly character, and I'm interested, I need some action. I need to be pulled into the scene. I need to care about the protagonist. So I think that's why I would stop reading early on, is because I don't feel like I'm immediately a part of the story.
About ditto, just make something happen. Even walk across the room, stub your toe, and then, of course, Chekhov's rule, make sure that matters. But just something. Because actually, the name with the last name, not everybody does that. So it's got to be some part of, hey, we're going to build the character up because of that last name.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can even have your protagonist hear the sound, smile, get out of bed enough to peer over the window, through the bedroom window to see Curly outside, just so we see the protagonist actively engaging with the scene. I think that would be kind of fun.
I want to relate it back to another in the sense that with both of these, the one where the woman was, young woman was having trouble walking, or she was lurching. With both of those, I desperately wanted this one and that one, there to be some interaction with the crowd or with this Curly if we were going to spend that much time on it. And yet I still couldn't raise my paddle because I was enjoying the description of Curly so much, so it was very torn.
I'm going to agree with all of those. I would say that the writing was really, really deft, and I like that. I just wanted more engagement with the narrator.
This one is titled Paddle Panel, the Summer of '64. Sidewalks on both sides of King Street were packed that night when we came out of Woolworth's, paper bags full of construction paper, school glue, and blunt-nosed scissors in hand. They're coming, we heard. Won't be long now. Mom's Volkswagen was blocks away. Pushing through the throng didn't seem a good idea. We heard a truck moving slowly our way and a hollow-sounding, amplified male voice, louder than the murmuring around us. Then we saw it, a pickup heading east toward Matanzas Bay, American and Confederate flags held high over people in the truck bed, over a white-sleeved man holding a microphone. Behind the truck, marchers, 6, 8, 10 abreast, followed. With men in jeans and t-shirts, boys and girls, and women in flowery cotton skirts and sundresses, several holding babies, I saw something I'd only read about. Dozens of people in white robes and hoods, some with faces bared, smiling, waving at the cheering and clapping crowds. Woolworths had made the local and national news that July of 1963 when 4 black teens sat at the lunch counter, attempted to order, and were immediately arrested and sent to reform schools. Before that hot, late June night, the summer after my freshman year at St. John's River Junior College, We'd avoided downtown at night for months. Too much going on, my father had said. But Bible school would start Monday and we needed things for crafts. The St. Augustine Record reported nightly marches and identified northern agitators and an amorphous group that included the wife of an African-American bishop and 3 white women, one, a Mrs. Endicott Peabody, mother of the governor of Massachusetts. They all spent time in the St. Johns County jail where my father had been dispatcher in 1952. The newspaper assured us everything would calm down once they, and others like them, left. Also, there was the fear their presence could disrupt plans for the 1965 quadricentennial celebration.
I got a little lost on the timeline towards the end there, and I didn't feel a strong connection to the narrator and his perceptions other than a few references to mom or dad. But it was interesting, and it was visual, and I'm picturing that throng and the Ku Klux Klan members, and I want to know what's happening, so there's a lot to keep you going, even though there's some things I was disconnected from.
I would say ditto, especially the getting lost on the timeline at the end.
I agree.
Definitely same thing. One thing for time walk lingo, nobody in that area in that time would say African American, they would just say colored. So definitely look at the time period you're using, and I know it's PC now, but use the language of the time if it's going to be in that time.
We've got a few more. Is everybody doing okay? Okay.
Panel?
Good so far.
This one has nothing with the title. Cassie Joe, tell me. The old man paused, looking into my eyes to make sure he had my full attention. Why the hell are you shoveling horse shit when you have a college degree? Not one to mince words, my grandpa sprinkled profanity like salt in his sentences. He used my first and middle name, as was his habit, to address me. Rather than being angry, he was probing, trying to understand the life of his granddaughter that was so different from his own. Letting out an exasperated sigh, I replied, Grandpa, I've told you a dozen times. It's a summer job to earn money to go to Thailand. Grandpa removed the rubber oxygen tubing from his nose and placed it on the counter in front of him. He was perched at the bar counter in the living room while I was a few feet lower than him at the kitchen table. We were in my grandparents' single-wide home, the place where my grandpa was confined due to his declining health. Once his oxygen was off, Grandpa grabbed the red and white packet of Marlboro Reds. He opened the container and selected one of the few remaining cigarettes. After closing the pack and setting it to the side, he lit the end of the cigarette. He took a long drag, then removing the cigarette and holding it in his hand, he asked, What's your degree in? I got a bachelor's in physiology, I answered. He furrowed his eyebrows and took another puff. To shovel horse shit? Yes, I explained, but that's not all I do. I also feed the horses, saddle them, lead trail rides. Seeing his unimpressed look, I trailed off. I'll use my degree later, though. Grandpa coughed a few times and went back to smoking. What is physiology, anyway?
I keep reading.
I would keep reading. I'd love to see the protagonists maybe interacting with the environment a little bit more, because I see a lot of grandpa in this that I'm not really sure what the main character's doing, but I would keep reading. I think it's super interesting.
I would definitely keep reading, and I love the grandpa's phrases and sprinkling profanity on his sentences like salt. Yeah.
Ditto.
Okay, this one has no title. Right on time at 9 p.m., the creaky wooden door of Don Quixote's restaurant opened, and the old woman in her signature sequins glided in on the tuxedoed arm of her younger, dapper partner. The slightly nervous college kid hostess immediately seated the couple at the dim, secluded table 22, which had been reserved for them every Saturday night for the past several months. She checked their name off of her reservation list, Garcia. The curly-haired waiter, with a wink at the hostess, whom he happened to be dating, breezed to table 22 with a bottle of the Garcia's favorite Beaujolais and 2 wine glasses. His timing and flourish, including the white napkin neatly folded over his left wrist, had been rehearsed over and over in the kitchen under the critical eye of the head server, Dottie. Tonight, his presentation was perfect as he uncorked the bottle and provided a taste for the gentlemen. Then he took their usual dinner order of bacalhau for 2. He was anticipating their usual generous tip. The formal dress and continental demeanor of the odd couple seemed particularly out of place in the unpretentious, rather rustic restaurant with its homemade tables and chairs. It was the only Spanish restaurant in Tucson amid a multitude of Mexican enterprises. Hidden away on a limber-lost street, it exuded a strong element of the exotic with its authentic Spanish cuisine and classical music. Juan Diego Robles, who played the guitar and mandolin on a wonky wooden stage. The romantic
I didn't want to go first. I felt like there was a lot of clunkiness of language that I was getting caught up on. There was some beautiful wording, there was some good verbs, but there was some clunky language that was catching me up. I wasn't feeling a sense of word motion, and I was struggling to figure out who the narrator was in the story, and that causes a disconnect.
I just felt like there was too much description. Yes, this is a quirky couple, and yes, they've chosen the only Spanish restaurant in Tucson, but what's this about? I wanted less description. Description is wonderful, but it does slow the pace down, and when you're opening the story, unless there's a reason that you're William Faulkner and are writing the first sentence of the Bear, which goes on for a page and a half, unless there's a reason for that linger, you need to move it along a little more. So maybe less description, more something happening with the quirky couple.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I would have just liked to have met the narrator a little bit more, because listening, I couldn't figure out really what the story was about, so I agree with both the statements.
One thing, is it a Spanish restaurant or is it a Mexican restaurant? That's highly verifiable on Yelp in like 10 seconds. If you put that in there, you better be darn sure there's absolutely one Spanish restaurant in Tucson. Because the worst reviews, wow, the author didn't check that there were 3 others in the main downtown area, and then your reviews get 1 star, 1 star. The author was lazy. So I'm not saying good or bad, just be really careful.
This one is titled Prologue. Grandma's large open coffin was actually the brick flower box outside the front door of her tiny house. Untended for several years now, the flowers were gone. The only living presence was a volunteer nondescript bush. The once fertile soil was depleted and had reverted to tan desert dirt. The burial, well, the sprinkling of Grandma's ashes in the flower box, occurred without me. As my mother would say, I was a day late and $1 short as usual. Mom wanted to get it over with as soon as possible and couldn't wait 1 more day so that I could be there. She didn't even inform me of her plan. Sally will just make us see, she said, and who can stand to be around when she starts blubbering? So my mother, my father, my brother the doctor, and his wispy wife proceeded without me. There were no prayers, just the sprinkling from a little wooden box, some fine anonymous dust, and some little white chips, maybe bone or teeth. The petite, sweet wife promised to keep flowers planted in the box. I knew that resolution would last about a week. Butterflies came. Because of the butterflies, my mother said she was sure burial in the flower box was the right thing to do. The gravesite purchased for Grandma years ago, right next to Gramps in Holy Hope Catholic Cemetery, stands empty. But that's not the whole story. The story begins and ends with Gramps.
That's pretty interesting. right in the first couple sentences there's some cliche, and just dispatch with cliche. Or come up with something, anything else, but just don't use that. Because the whole point of the writing is something perhaps new. So if they're going to use it, it has to be a dialogue or something, but it just immediately kind of knocked me and derailed me. I'm like, really? In the opening 4 or 5 sentences, we're going to use the cliche.
Okay? This one has number one at the top. Melanie Briggs was dying. This time she was sure. She saw herself on the floor, her shoulder pressed into the cold metal corner of the bathroom stall. She watched as if from above. Saw herself clutching at her chest, heard the rasping breath, but she could not feel the hot tears running down her cheeks. She was surprised by what she did feel. Tenderness. Like she was watching someone else suffocate in the student bathroom at school. Someone that she was rooting for. Like a character on a TV show. One that she wasn't so sure about in the first season, but by the 3rd season they have worked their way into her heart far enough that she cries when the writers kill her off. She exhaled on a sob, yet she could not inhale past the clamp on her chest, deflating again and again until there was nothing left but the collapse of her lungs and that terrifying absence of oxygen. Focus on what's around you, she whispered to herself. What do you see? What can you touch? Time slowed to a crawl and she sank back into her body. The tile beneath her butt was cold. That was the first thing she felt when she started to come back to herself. Sunlight filtered in, lighting up the aluminum walls of the stall. A door opened. The sound of students rushing past filled the bathroom. Then silenced again as the door swished shut. Footsteps, then the turning of a tap. She focused on the small rush of water. Tears streamed down her face. She traced her finger along the ground of the tile, and finally the air came. A face appeared beneath the stall door, thick-framed black glasses, her cheeks red from being upside down, long black hair that touched the floor. Are you okay? The girl's necklace fell across her lips. It was a thin strand of multicolored beads. She grabbed it between plump fingers and held it to the side. I'm good, Bellamy said. It was only her 2nd day at this school, but she recognized the girl from her English class. Okay, well, it's lunch. Would you like to walk with me to the cafeteria? Sure. Just give me a second. Bellamy scrubbed her hands over her face and tied her shoe. When she emerged, the girl handed her a wet paper towel. Thanks, Bellamy said. No problem. I know what it's like to be new. Yeah? Oh, yeah. I'm always new. She pressed the paper towel to the back of her neck for a few seconds, then wadded it up and tossed it in the bin. She followed the girl out, trying to remember her name.
The picture of the girl leaning over with the beads in the hair and the upside down, I love that.
I would actually start with that. I agree. I think starting with that would be amazing. And since I can tell this is YA, so I think with YA, really it's about being in that character's head a little bit more. So even though I love the descriptions, I think keeping that tension would really come through that emotion. So that's just something to keep in mind. But there are a lot of beautiful descriptions, and I agree, the beads and the plump fingers, and I think that's a really strong way to start it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You start with the girl with the beads on her face, and then a moment ago I was sitting on my butt completely disoriented or whatever it was. So toss in the backstory to get the shocker immediately.
This one is titled Aesthetically Human. Till Death Do Us Part. Odell Weaver fell from his horse and into the sagebrush as it started snowing. The lightning through his chest made the hairs on his limbs dance, and the sudden shock from the saddle made his bones vibrate. He felt a great wave of heat embrace him from head to toe. Everything under the skin crawled and cooled and constricted. and Odell stared into the sky. Indigo twinges and silver fireflies filled his eyes. The snow breathed with Odell. Deep inhalations that surged like a paper bag punched with holes. The sky pillowed and then retreated behind trails of snow stars. Pillowed and retreated. Pillowed and retreated. Pillowed and retreated. Odell sucked in a gasp, last breath, and pulled at his throat. And then he died. And the next heading is Shadow of a Man. The silhouette of Odell Weaver lay splayed and naked in the snow, sun-baked skin tensed against the cloud-white countryside. The prone man's limbs stretched away from an unmoving body. Flakes fell and lingered and melted on his exposed skin. Small, soft hills formed in the gentle slopes of his pillowed physique. Odell's eyes stared.
For me, it was the repetition.
Uh-oh.
Hello?
Oh, it died.
Battery dead.
Oh, great.
Batteries dead.
We can
Oh,
yell
you made it
now.
pretty far.
Oh my goodness, yes, great. For me, it was repetition, and I kind of got confused as to really what was happening. And so, kind of going along with what we've said before, get with the action. You know, even someone dying isn't always strong enough. You know what I mean? I think there's a way to create tension. So for me, it really was repetition. I probably would have stopped reading earlier on, actually.
I was willing to stick with it until the break in the next section. And I think it's a really interesting way to open with, nobody wants to die, nobody wants their character to die, but it's certainly a compelling way to grab the reader's attention. You just have to recognize that you can only go on so long about it, and then you need to move on to where this is, what's happening, why we care. And I don't mean that sounds so callous.
Dip.
Last one, Gabe. This one is titled Pulling Dragonfly Wings. He dreamt of hot, wet summers, of splashing in the lake and laughter and the sound of buzzing insects across the water's surface. He dipped his dreamy toes into the shallows and snatched at dragonflies. They wriggled and dangled from his fingers before he plucked their wings. They wriggled and circled on the water's surface as he waded deeper. Under the water, he watched dragonfly silhouettes wriggle, and he sank deeper, and the water around him went cold and dark. He was drowning, drinking deep static, empty inhales of nothing. He opened his eyes. Richard Halloran drank in the dim light of his hibernation pod as consciousness struggled to return. His eyes burned, lungs broken, mouth opened and closed in hollow, choking, fish-like spasms. He was still drowning in a cloud of carbon dioxide and nitrogen. Halloran's bulging eyes groped around the pod's interior as shapes and colors blurred and blazed. I saw through the door. Yes.
I was a little confused, but also for me there was two uses of verbs that they weren't congruent with the noun they were used with, and I'm not good at remembering right like that. But it threw me off. I can't remember which ones they were. If anybody else knows what I'm talking about, but it jarred me. His eyes groped, and then there was another. Anyway, it just really jarred me, and so combined with that confusion, that's what stopped me.
When you're creating a world, you need, and this is going to sound strange, but when you're creating a world, you need that world to be believable. And so be conservative in your use of verbs and adjectives and things like that. You want your reader to see completely in that world. You want not to jar them with something that doesn't make sense to them. So when you create the world, you have to suck them in and not give them anything that makes them feel like, oh wait, I'm in an entirely created world that's not working for me. So I would say as a biologist, you might want to look up dragonfly life cycles.
I agree with them as well. But I would also say just a lack of consistency for me. Talking about laughter and swimming in the lake in the summer, I'm immediately thinking of something more contemporary, maybe even something a little bit more YA and nostalgic, and then all of a sudden I'm in a sci-fi setting. And so I think when easing your reader into the world, it is important to establish a sense of place, a sense of world building, and then you can always bring some of that in later when you're, with flashback or memories or anything like that. But I would say not to start with something that may confuse the reader.
I actually liked the beginning once I realized it was a sci-fi. As soon as I said, oh, hey, this is a sci-fi, and we're going to go into this dream state, this guy's drowning in whatever CO2 issues he's got, then, okay, so seeing the cover of the book and knowing where this was on the bookshelf, knowing that, I can roll with the beginning because, oh, hey, we're floating in space, we're doing something unreal sci-fi anyway. Okay, well, we'll roll with this. But until we got to the pod thing, like, oh, where are we going? But I think if we all saw the picture at the beginning, maybe more judicious role. Not to speak for everyone, but a thought.
Please give these four another hand, you guys, for their honest commentary. It's helpful. And I don't know where our fearless leaders are, but Jessica and, oh, you're right there, sweetheart. Has your cohort been crying, left the sea forever?